Yep.
Okay.
Great. Should we start?
Yeah, I think.
Okay, great. Okay. So, hi everyone. I hope you had a good short break. Next is Pablo, who's going to tell us about linguistic and embodied systems in conceptual processing.
Thank you very much. Great to see you all again. I'm humbled by the previous presentations. Here we have linguistic and embodied systems in conceptual processing, variation across individuals and items. Often in psychology, we've been looking at group level analysis. My camera, yeah. Okay, group level analysis, and less frequently at individual differences, which is variation within participants with variables such as previously alluded to by Elise, for instance. In this case, vocabulary side we'll be looking at and well, mentioning another one. Okay, so let's get to it. The topic is understanding the meaning of words, so which is known as conceptual processing, semantic processing, where we have a linguistic system which is based on the relationship across words. So there's a saying by a linguist called Firth from decades ago who said, "You know a word by the company it keeps." And that's largely true. The co-occurrence of words helps very much. So it works in this way. You listen to or read a word such as, say, dog, and related words come up. Think of lead, etc., etc., and those help. So this is a fairly surface level comprehension, but it does occur, and it occurs both in comprehension and in production. There's another system that comes up after, within the time course, a little after the first, the linguistic system, which is known as, the second one is known as the embodied system, which is composed of some subsystems. I'll be mentioning semantic priming study, semantic decision, and power analysis. So what systems to analyze in cognition is always a decision, right? All models are wrong, but some are useful, and the models and the systems that we think of are context sensitive, are dependent on what the research question that we want to look at, the literature that's available. And so it is within semantic memory. I've been talking about the linguistic system that I described, and then there's the embodied system composed. The last four should be a little indented. The perceptual system, the motor, emotional, and social system. In here in the references, I've reviewed all of this. Okay, so I've been doing a secondary data analysis based on large data sets, bringing them together to investigate meaningful questions and bringing the data together for that purpose. So I've brought together several data sets within two main studies, and I'll address first the study that's the semantic priming. Semantic priming is a famous paradigm within conceptual processing where we have a prime word and a target word, and we look at the association between these words and how this association influences the responses from participants. This is a very large data set, considering the other that we have, 500 participants, so over 1,500 words. The decision, the task is a lexical decision where participants answer whether words are indeed words or they are non-words. So within semantic priming, they are presented a prime word, in this case in capitals, which is a true word, and a target word, which may be true or not. In this case, it is not. The prime is always a word, yeah. Well, timeline 150 milliseconds, intertrial interval 50 or 1050. The target word, well, it's presented afterwards. My research question is the role of the linguistic and perceptual systems in conceptual processing. The variables used include the semantic association between the prime and the target word, as measured by a latent semantic analysis measure, which looks at, it's a computational measure of the association between words. Next is visual modality difference between prime and target word, that is based on norms, based on visual norms collected by my supervisor, Lynott and Vukovic Connell. I measured the difference. So it's like the counterpart of the previous one. So this one measures the associations, the semantic association within the linguistic system. This one measures the association, but in terms of a difference, actually. So it's the polar opposite, just a difference, and it's within the visual modality. Right. Next are individual differences, mainly vocabulary size, attention, as well as attentional control as a control, because presumably, based on the literature, it is very likely related to vocabulary size. You know, the higher the vocabulary size, the higher many other variables. So for control, I'm not particularly interested in attentional control, but it's important to control because vocabulary size is of interest. Okay. So the dataset is it's a crossed random effects dataset. What does this mean? It means that participants and items are vary across the level of each other. Many different words are presented to each participant, and vice versa. And each participant and each word is presented to, right. So it's fully crossed. So you can see here. So for participants, 4 participants we have here. And we have here 4 words, and these are the participants for each word. And before we had the right, so you can see that this is crossed, and what this means is that it requires ideally a linear mixed effects model to account for this nested variation within. And this is the beginning of this model with the random intercepts by participant and by target word, followed by subject random slopes, like this, with some of them being removed on the grounds of lack of convergence following an extensive tutorial. And last, by item random slopes, In this case, fewer random throws are required. Okay, these are the results. So let's begin to look at it. Keeping in mind the keeping in mind the role of linguistic and embodied systems. Okay, so firstly we have well, these are controls, word frequency, and these are just lexical controls that are usually used to control the robustness of the actual effects of interest. This one is also used within the individual differences, and we begin here with effects of interest, vocabulary size. In terms of significance, it has a fairly moderate effect. Word association has a large effect. Next is the difference in visual rating between the prime and the target word, with a considerable effect. Next is the interstimulus interval, either 50 milliseconds or 1050. And we get to the interactions. These are controls, because next we'll be looking at the interaction between vocabulary size and the word association, as well as the visual modality difference, which are here. These two here. We'll be visualizing these effects in a moment, but let's begin. Here we have vocabulary size by visual modality difference, where we can see that participants, here we have vocabulary size in the colors, and in the x-axis we have visual rating difference from less to more. So what we have, generally speaking, sorry, the scroll. What we have regarding the visual rating difference between the prime word and the target word is that, in general terms, with a lower relation between the prime and target word in terms of visual rating, we have lower RT. That is, the lower the difference between the prime and the target word, the lower the RT, which is fairly sensible, because the way that this works is it's known as priming. So if it's a facilitation that the prime word provides for the target word, and in this facilitation we can see that visual rating has a role. Now, what we find is that for in terms of vocabulary size, the role of visual rating works in the following way. Participants with higher vocabulary are less affected by the visual rating. They are simply less susceptible to this variable. Next is visual modality difference. Next, we are looking. Sorry for the title. Here in the x-axis, you can see the actual variable. Recoded ISI is the interstimulus interval or intertrial interval, and we find, once again, regarding vocabulary size, that participants with higher vocabulary are less affected by this variable. In general terms, regarding interstimulus interval, we find that larger interstimulus intervals lead to longer RTs. So higher vocabulary participants are less affected by the prime word, the relationship between the prime and the target word, specifically word association and visual modality difference, as well as interstimulus interval. This converges with previous findings that higher and lower vocabulary participants differ in the variables that they are affected by. Potentially, the variables affecting high vocabulary participants are more selective, fewer, and more relevant to the task. We have another interaction here, vocabulary size by target word frequency. And in this regard, what we find is that there is not a difference between participants of different vocabulary sizes in the extent to which word frequency affects them, and the same with the orthographic level distance, which is another lexical variable, suggesting that these may be more crucial variables, whereas previously we found that the higher vocabulary participants were not affected by the previous variables. In this regard, we find that higher and lower vocabulary participants are similarly affected. Next, we have the semantic decision dataset, where the task is an overt task, where participants decide whether a word is a series of words are either abstract or concrete. A fairly large dataset, 300 participants, 10,000 words. The variables are similar. I brought together the visual modality ratings from the Lancaster sensorimotor norms, again, like in the previous case. And in this, and in the case of the linguistic variable, instead of word association based on latest semantic analysis, we have word co-occurrence, which was calculated by Kai and Luis's study from a couple of years ago. Random effects, intercepts, fairly similar model to the previous one. In terms of random effects, here we have the results of the fixed effects, where beginning with the controls, we have controls up to here, lexical controls, and we begin with an experimental variable of interest, word co-occurrence not being significant on its own, but we will look at an interaction later. Visual rating being significant, vocabulary size being significant. This is a lexical control. Vocabulary size by visual rating. What we find here, we'll be looking at a plot afterwards, is that visual rating affects participants of different vocabulary size in different ways. Beginning with the first interaction of interest, vocabulary size by word co-occurrence, we find similarly as with the previous dataset, once again the same pattern in which participants with high vocabulary size are less affected by this variable. So particularly if the high vocabulary size participants here are in orange, which are the outliers with a very large vocabulary. Next in purple, the middle ones are in green. And what you find is that the slope flattens for participants with higher vocabulary size, except for the outlier in orange. In the case of the orange one, there is even a reversal. There seems to be a reversal of the effect where with higher word co-occurrence, they have higher RTs, which is counterintuitive, but it may be driven by the fact that the model is linear. So there's a linear projection, and it's not always fully accurate in the case of outliers. Next, there's the interaction between vocabulary size and visual modality difference. I'm going to have to hurry, I believe. where we have a very similar pattern. Once again, you can see that for high vocal participants, the effect flattens. Okay, power analysis, Monte Carlo simulations. For word co-occurrence, we have this effect. These are still very few simulations, just 30, whereas a few hundreds are needed, but we get a sense of the effects. So for some effects, we can see participants. I'm plotting a projection on the x-axis of what more participants would be, and we can see that for word co-occurrence from 2,000 participants, we get over 80%, whereas for visual modality rating, from around 100 participants, we are well over 80%. Vocabulary size, around 100 participants, once again, well over 80. Vocabulary size by word co-occurrence, once again, a very large sample size will be required. Vocabulary size by visual modality rating, low sample size needed. Concluding, it's the comprehension of words is a dynamic process in which there are contextual and individual differences playing roles. The required statistical power is much larger than usual sample sizes found in the literature. Okay, some references there. The slides will be available. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Pablo. It's very interesting to hear about these different relationships between embodied and linguistic and attention and vocabulary. We have some time for questions. There haven't been any questions posted yet, but I do have a question. I was wondering, could you maybe tell a bit more about what you mean by visual modality rating? Like, how was that assessed?
Absolutely. These are modality norms, which are assessed by presenting participants with words and asking them to rate on a self-report basis, rate how much you relate this word to the visual modality. For greater accuracy, they are not just asked that, but they are asked along with that what they conceive of that word in terms of basically many other modalities. So auditory, all the other 5 famous ones, along with some others such as prospective, so the internal feeling related to that concept, and some others. So they are asked about all of them, and that way we get them to separate in their minds what each of these, and they rate it from 1 to 5 on a simple scale, or 1 to 7, and then well, that's presented to many participants, and a large average is calculated for every word.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. We have a question posted. Have you ever used latent Dirichlet, I'm not sure if I can pronounce it, Dirichlet allocation to look at the co-occurrence of words?
The Dirichlet.
Diricchlet.
No, doesn't sound familiar so far. Immediately doesn't come immediately to mind. But thanks for the suggestion. I will definitely check it out. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any more questions?
I do have a question, if I may come in rather than typing it.
Mm-hmm.
Pablo, I look at language development, as you might know. It's Margriet here, by the way, and I just wonder, do you know of any work that looks at kind of the embodied cognition aspect in vocabulary development?
Yes, from Art Glenberg. Art Glenberg and some of his colleagues, Art Glenberg being one of the pioneers in embodied cognition within psycholinguistics, from Arizona State University, has been working over the last 5 or 10 years on this issue, particularly the way that embodied language comprehension can contribute to the learning of new languages and indeed the development. So, but that's the only thing that comes to mind. There is an awful lot within development. That's true. It's mainly within adults and within, adult populations, largely the research. But
thank you. No, that's very helpful. And yeah, I agree. I think it might be an important aspect to actually look at, but I don't think that much has been done yet. Thank you for an interesting talk, Pablo.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Pablo. So what we're going to do now is we're going to hand over to Sarah Chadwick. So Sarah, if you want to pull your slides up, that would be absolutely brilliant. And then you can get started.
Yeah, no problem. Can you see me okay?
I can't see you just yet.